Very good. So my name is Akanksha. Thank you so much for being here. I'm from the Open Ed Steering Committee this year, and I use she, her pronouns, and I'm calling in from Ottawa, Canada, or the Algonquin Nation. So before this session starts, I have a statement to read on behalf of the conference. The 2020 Open Education Conference is committed to being a safe, accessible, equitable, and inclusive environment for all. Following our code of conduct is essential to facilitate a positive environment centered on these values in all of our conference spaces. So the session is being moderated to ensure that the code of conduct is being followed, and please take a moment to reflect on the code and act in ways that build upon the open education community and support all the diverse voices that we've had. As a reminder, the session will be recorded and it'll also be live captioned, except for breakout rooms if they're being used. If there are unmet accessibility needs, please feel free to let me know, as we want to continue to strive to improve the conference for this year, but also in terms of the future. As a reminder, please stay on mute just in case there's a lot of static in your background, and also the presenters, will ask you to unmute if they need you to. And I have already started the recording of the session, and you folks are good to go.
That's great. Well, thank you so much. Hi, everybody. Thank you for being here today for our presentation. This is really exciting. We come to you from Kwantlen Polytechnic University on the West Coast, and I'm speaking to you today from just outside of Vancouver in Richmond, which is also on the unceded and traditional and current territory of the Musqueam Nation. So I'm really happy to be here today with two students who I had the honor of working with this summer, Vanessa, Mora, and Paris Summers. And we are presenting to you a project that we did this summer where our class built an OER. Our class was a marketing class, a fourth-year marketing class, and for many students, this was their final class before graduating. So what better way to go out than with a big bang and by creating an open resource. So I'm going to walk you through that presentation today. And if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. I'll do my best to take a look at the chat as I go through the slides. And if I miss anything, I'm sure one of my co-presenters can help me out. Okay, so I will get started. I'm also going to share a link at the end of the presentation, or actually maybe Vanessa or Paris, if you could drop that link into the chat. If you would like to follow along with our slides independently, you're welcome to do that. There's also a number of hyperlinks in the slides because we won't have time to get to absolutely everything that I want to show you. All right, so in a nutshell, here was what we did in the summer. We had 34 students in our class in 13 weeks to create an open resource. So this presentation is largely built on the how did you do it and the experience of what this was like. So I have three objectives for all of you today. I would like to be able to identify or help you identify ways that you could organize and engage a similar project if you are an educator in a teaching environment. I'd also like you to become more familiar with some of the tools and technologies that are used for open and in creating open resources. And these are all tools that my students also used quite liberally in the book that they built. And then at the end of the day, I think it's nice to just walk away and feel inspired by the work of students and hear from students themselves about a way to engage in their learning experience that might be different than the traditional format. We had a number of working principles going into this project, and this was really important because a lot of the time in marketing, we see a lot of underrepresentation, and we also see a lot of stories and narratives that just aren't brought to the forefront. So it was really important for us to put a spotlight on diversity throughout our OER. And we also wanted to contextualize this around the Sustainable Development Goals. The students have created an open resource for nonprofits, activists, advocates, and social justice leaders to develop marketing campaigns. A lot of the time, the work around developing marketing campaigns is done by agencies and PR firms, and those are a lot of the time services that people can't afford, especially maybe activists and boots on the ground leaders. So we wanted to create an open resource that could be used and be more accessible for everybody. You don't need an MBA, a business degree, or some expertise in marketing to do this. So language, tone of voice, and creating a really engaging user experience was critical for us in developing this OER. We want it to be used by everybody and anybody. So if you don't have the money to hire an ad firm, hopefully this resource can help. And then last, we really wanted to make sure that we developed assets of value. So these include a number of items that could be downloaded and repurposed and readapted for nonprofits or activists, advocates, social justice leaders in order to customize their marketing campaign. Now, speaking as an educator, in order to get started on such a project, I really needed to bring the students kind of up to the same playing field. What was everybody's familiarity with open, with Creative Commons, with the SDGs? Well, it turns out that a lot of students didn't have a lot of exposure to any of these topics. So the first step in a project like this was really contextualization, understanding these foundational and these cornerstone concepts. So we spent a couple of weeks working on developing that familiarity. And we did this through some mini module work. And we wrote up some wikis that all students could contribute to really better understand and go deeper in all of these topics. What is the open movement? What are Creative Commons licenses? What are the SDGs? And what tools do we use to help develop OERs? This way, they had that foundation built and they could go into the project already well armed with the knowledge. The next step after contextualizing this project was really around organization. And I have to admit, I spent a lot of sleepless nights back in the spring because this course ran from May to August. So in sort of the throes of our lockdown and isolation, I spent a lot of sleepless nights trying to plan a way to organize 34 students to write an OER in a distant learning environment because we were entirely online for the summer, of course. So with very little sleep, lots of caffeine, and a great deal of planning and throwing ideas around, the idea I came up with was to separate our group into 3 and go through a series of rotations. And this worked well, I think, not without its challenges, because the book that we were designing was divided into 3 parts. So the class, therefore, was divided into 3s. So each group started off in one section, part 1, part 2, or part 3. And there's quite a bit of content in each of these 3 parts that students needed to either develop or they had to research and curate from other open sources. So they were developing open research skills, curation skills, readaption skills, editing skills, everything all at the same time. And they were each working in their own part, the 3 groups. After about a month in each part, we rotated to the next group. And then we did that rotation another time. So that gave students a chance in these large groups to touch each part of the textbook. And they also were able to develop their skills over time and really evolve those skills from being dependent first on research and creation to then fine-tuning their editing skills. And then a few other skills that I'm going to talk about shortly around accessibility and design. So round 1 would have looked like working on developing the content for that particular part of the group, whichever of the 3 parts a group started on. They would break into smaller groups and they would divide and conquer, and they would work together as larger teams and smaller teams to create the content that they needed. And then before moving into the next part of the book, they would create a transition document. And these transition documents were passed on to the team that would be entering the part of the book that they had just worked on. This way, they could identify, here are the parts of the book that we haven't finished working on. Here's what we'd like you to look at. Here's what we maybe struggled with and we need some help with. So this enabled them to even work as a larger class through these transition documents, and also as a way to itemize and communicate what more needed to be done on this OER. For those of us who work on OERs, it always feels like you're revising. And so this was an important theme to continue in this project. Additionally, my role was to support the teams and the students as they were developing content and curating content. But then also I overlaid hypothesis on our book, which was developed in Pressbooks, and I could pinpoint specific areas for editing or fine tuning. We did this then after the next round. Students had another chance to work on the next part of the book. Transition documents were created to support the incoming team so that they knew what to work on. And then I would go through hypothesis and provide all sorts of feedback and tips on things to look for. And then we repeated this the last time. Now, when we got to the end of the book, this is towards the end of the course, much of the content had already been created. So there wasn't a lot of new content that had to be made. We had, I think, over 70 H5P content types created and a number of downloaded or downloadable assets like templates made in Google Docs and Excel. So what we did at this point was we broke the groups up into some smaller groups called mini teams. We had one student from each of the 3 larger groups break out into a mini team to go through the BC Campus Accessibility Toolkit and apply and ensure that the OER was developed with accessibility in mind. So they were able to go through and each section of the book and apply or make any edits that were required. We then created another mini team where we had one student from each of the 3 large groups to develop a style and design guide. And this was a really great way for us to ensure that the whole look and feel of the book was consistent, because we've had 34 authors and editors. There was often different fonts or different colors, different styles. So this helped bring the visual consistency together. And then the remaining 28 students together wrote the introduction to the OER. And this was almost a magical moment for me to see 28 students come together and write a really beautiful, profound, meaningful, and very heartfelt introduction to the guide and what it means and how they envision people interacting with it. So this is an example here of the hypothesis used on Pressbooks, where I would go in and discuss some of the key components and things I'd like the teams to look at. And then, of course, this is the toolkit that students use to help them learn about accessibility and how to apply those accessibility components to the OER. I'd also like to say that Josie Gray from BC Campus came and spoke to our class and provided a really, really valuable presentation that really helped enlighten everybody about how to work around accessibility and how to develop it from the ground up. And then this is the wonderful style guide that some examples here that students created for our OER. And this really brought the whole OER together in a way that was just visually really rich and consistent and very professional looking. And fortunately, we had a number of design students in this course, so they knew exactly what to do. This was speaking their language. And Paris is one of those students. And then this is a screenshot here of our introduction. And this introduction was really special, as I mentioned, because this is actually a adaptation of a document that was created by Jesse Stommel, who many people know in the open community. And Jesse created this document that he CC licensed. And I have used this document for my students it's sort of a fill in the blank exercise. And they were able to write this really beautiful introduction by taking 28 students, breaking them down into teams of 2 and filling out this introduction together. So as many educators usually ask when you present something like this, they say, this is great. How the heck do you grade something like this? Because as educators, we're often trying to figure out what that final piece looks like. Well, I think in all reality, when you engage in a project like this that is very creative and unconventional, then you have to be prepared to be creative and unconventional in your grading practices. So I definitely employed ungrading principles here and relied heavily on reflection, which was critical and also probably one of the best decisions I've ever made in any course. Students went and filled out a self-assessment checklist, and this was very evidence-based. They spoke to their contribution to the guide on an individual basis, but also in working in their larger teams and their mini teams as well. They also created reflective e-portfolios. And these portfolios were a really important way for them to capture their learning journey. It wasn't just about what they had done, but it was the process of what they learned along the way. So they could reach back to the very first couple weeks of the course and talk about starting at a place of not having ever heard of the open movement or OERs or CC licensing or H5P, to recognizing now that they are an author of an OER and that they have done high-level open research, they've curated content, they've adapted content, they've created H5P content, they've worked in Pressbooks, and now they are the author of an OER that will be used widely by marketing educators, but also hopefully by our target audience of nonprofits, activists, social justice leaders working on marketing campaigns. Number of outcomes that I was really excited to see from a project like this. And a lot of these can be divided into 3 categories. So students developed really strong research skills around open and also creation. So they were creating content that was visually compelling, but they were also writing original content that they've copied, that they've CC licensed into the guide, and then working with accessibility. Teamwork was such an important outcome because we were a group of 35 and we were spread out all over, everywhere from the Lower Mainland in the Vancouver area to overseas. And we had to work as a class, we had to work in larger teams and in mini teams, and we had to set and meet deadlines and communicate with our classmates work that still needed to be done. So the amount of teamwork that was done on this project was critical, and we learned a lot from this. And I think one of the most important pieces, and maybe the students will talk about how transition documents really helped ensure that things would run very smoothly when we were transitioning between parts of the book. And then of course, reflection is just a really wonderful way for students to reflect on their learning and to be able to really recognize from sort of an introspective level about where they've come in this 13-week journey. And we incorporated a number of guest speakers into the course, and this was also a great way to contextualize some of the content for them. So I am now going to pass this over to Vanessa. And Vanessa, I'm going to go through your slides, and we'll hear from you now about your experience on this project.
Thank you, Andrea. And hi, everyone. So my name is Vanessa, as Andrea has introduced me already. And I graduated this fall from Kwantlen Polytechnic University with my Bachelor of Business Administration in Marketing Management. It's a really long title. And similar to my colleague Paris, who's going to talk in a little bit, I'm just going to share my experiences on developing this OER, which we cater towards nonprofits. So I've laid out 3 points. Thank you, Krista. I've laid out 3 points in the slide prior to this one, where I'm basically summarizing my experience. And I can say that throughout my university career, there have been memorable projects, but I feel like this is probably the one that I will always take with me, just because well, to begin, it was the first semester that we were under lockdown, and so everything was done remotely. But also, it forced me to think structurally. And I think that that is something that was different from other classes and other assignments I've had to do. And what I mean by that is because of the layout of the class with the 3 teams and the 3 rotations, having us work in all parts of the book, but at different times, it made me think what I need to do and what needs to be done as a team in order for each of the sections to be complete and ready for the next group. So talking about the transition documents that Andrea mentioned, those were super valuable for us because we would spend a month working on one section of the book while another group is working on the other. And once we have that rotation, we're kind of just then seeing for the first time what that group has accomplished. And we want to obviously make sure that we keep the goal that they had in mind when they were working on their section of the book, but also improve on it. And so those transition documents basically gave us a layout of the understanding that they had as a team when they were working on it and what we could do to make sure that that section was completed. Um, I think that because of that structure, we had to work with students that came from different disciplines. And for the most part, I have always worked with business students, but this class brought together students from like the graphic design program. And it was just a great opportunity to work with other students that maybe think differently or approach things differently just because of the many years of education they've already had in their respective program. And I think that that provided a lot of diversity and perspective, which is always great to have, especially for a resource that's going to be used by any audience. And additionally, I didn't really know too much about the world of open before this course. And I'm really grateful to Andrea for bringing it to my attention because I didn't realize prior to this project just how much students depended on textbooks and how much of a cost there is associated with that. And so I personally was always just kind of trained to purchase a textbook, learn from it, read it, and then just expect that the class's content is going to be largely based on that. And so I didn't really know how to search for open content. And so open research was totally new to me. And I found it challenging at first because I didn't know how to differentiate what was open source or what was copyright. So I think that the mini modules that we had to do at the beginning just set a really great foundation for what is the type of content that I should be looking at and what is the type of content that we should be including into the textbook to make sure that whoever is reading it is able to take on that content and then modify it if needed. I think that Pressbooks also made it really easy for us to put together this book because it set up the pages in a way that I have been used to using WordPress. And so that was something that I also really appreciated because it was super easy to navigate, to build out sections. And then also there was the integration with H5P content, which Andrea mentioned as well. And that was something that I had never created before, was learning how to put information in a way that is more visual and more easy to understand. And I think that H5P was able to really capture that and even allowing us to take designed files that we made on Canva was even better. And when we are able to link to videos and link to external files that we create on our own for an open source, then that just made me feel more engaged and more involved with the project. Um, Also, I was able to learn so much about the marketing industry from the point of view of a nonprofit. And I think that that kind of opened my eyes to the amount of support that advocates and nonprofits really need to try and get their message across, whatever it be or whatever movement they're trying to move forward. I think that creating this open source um, resource helped me realize that a lot of the information that is online is usually behind a paywall, and putting it out into the open and so that it's available for others to use was something that made me really proud to be a part of. And here on this slide, there are two screenshots of taken from the e-portfolio that I had to make. And I found that building my e-portfolio was a really meaningful exercise because it helped me refine my WordPress skills, but more importantly, it helped me reflect on my learnings. And a lot of the learnings came from the guest speakers that we had in each rotation. And I think that it's something that's really nice to look back on because it captures all of the work that was part of making the project final, and it's something that I can neatly and concisely showcase to my network. So now I can just send someone a link and they're able to see exactly what we worked on and the behind the scenes almost of creating the open source. So I think overall, to capture my experience with the project, the quote that I've chosen is, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And I think that this is really because, especially in a distance learning environment where we had to adapt to working remotely and working solely based on Teams and Zoom, it was difficult and challenging to say the least, but also made it all that more rewarding because I felt like I could count on my professor and then all of the other students that I worked with to really have a true collaboration in the state of the world right now, and create something that I'm personally really, really proud of.
Thank you, Vanessa. Paris, I'm going to bring it over to you. I think we're quite tight on time here. So I apologize, but I will let you unmute your mic and we'll go through this in just the next couple minutes. So stay with us, folks.
Thank you so much. I'll try and be quick. I have kind of a generalized description anyway. It's not very in-depth as Vanessa had it. Thank you, Vanessa. My name is Paris Summers. I will be graduating this spring from the Wilson School of Design at KPU for graphic design for marketing. Today I'm going to tell you about my experiences. On the project itself, I'm really pleased with how the guidebook turned out. To see it through to completion and actually be able to submit it to something like this, which shows that it's finished and final, and it's nice to see. And to have something meaningful for open education and the sustainable development goals. Actually, to answer Jeffrey's question, through design, I have learned about the SDGs. We have talked about them through experience with design. I'm not sure about marketing so much, though. That might be passed on to Andrea afterwards. While conducting open research, we learned how to understand and comply with Creative Commons and better research using Google's advanced search engine, which helped a lot with finding the Creative Commons. Our class of graduating marketers and graphic designers were able to incorporate our own insight and contribute to the guide to create something entirely unique to us. So we got to contribute to the Creative Commons rather than just curating everything altogether. Rotations allowed for everyone to visit each section, which gave us all a 360 understanding of our project, which was really great because I felt I had more control of the whole project and not just an aspect of it. While developing an open resource in Pressbooks, the platform and H5P tools seemed intimidating because of consistency, just like a question just above was asking about the number of students. I would actually say, to answer that question, 3 people for the smaller groups was perfect because we didn't want too many people having a say in the consistency. Having just people from each rotation to talk about the consistency throughout was just what we needed. That allowed it to be more cohesive and open to all users. Collaboration and teamwork in a distance learning environment had its pros and cons. Pros were that almost everyone's schedules were considered, and we were all able to work at times that best suited us. Cons were that not everyone could easily adapt to online learning, for sure. And my expectations for others' individual effort declined throughout the semester. But with the e-portfolios, that definitely was the thing that showed what we did do and what our contributions were individually. And I appreciate that. They were a great idea to show our process as well as a good introduction to the authors of the guide. And again, we can look back at our progress, and I feel good about the contributions that I've made for open education and social causes. And this is an example of my e-portfolio. Through it, we decided to create a whole, an SDG ourselves based off of them. And ours was No Hunger BC. So me, as well as my design colleagues, put together an entire artificial nonprofit to base everything off of. So you guys actually have a good example and not just resources. In the end, the ungrading allowed me to set my own expectations Thank
to
you.
the early days of online learning. This project,
That's my
overall, I think we adapted pretty well to the early days.
I can't seem to
Overall,
stop
I
it.
think we adapted pretty well to the early days of online learning.
I'm so
Overall,
sorry.
I think we adapted pretty well to the early days
Is that better?
I think so.
with the teams to make sure we stayed on task and had our sections ready on time.
It's auto playing.
That's that, and it stopped. Okay. Yes, very true. Me. Yeah. So ungrading helped me set my own expectations as well as for others, and also helped in the perspective of everyone else. It was a good method for those who couldn't meet those expectations regularly. And I understand not everyone had the same goals for the class. So having to set your own expectations allowed for a pretty stress-free environment. But I do wish that the ungrading could have held people who didn't do as much work more accountable. I was going to say exactly that. Overall, I think we adapted pretty well to the early days of online learning. This project required a lot of trust and constant communication with the teams to make sure we stayed on task and had our sections ready on time. And I think we did pretty well.
That's great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'm sorry this went a little bit over and that autoplay kept going there.
Sorry about that. That's my fault.
No, that's okay. All right. So I haven't been able to look at the chat for any questions, and I'm not sure if folks are still here or not, but if there's anything I should get to help answer. And I'd also like to make a shout out to Karen Meyer-Klein, who was attending our presentation here. And Karen she's an open librarian at KPU and one of our guest speakers. And Karen was just so valuable and helpful for everyone. So just another thank you to Karen. So the e-portfolios, there's a question about the e-portfolios. There are links in the PowerPoints. So you're welcome to visit Vanessa and Paris's e-portfolios. They provided links for you. So you can, and do we have a link to the slides in the chat? So folks, you're welcome to visit our PowerPoint slide, and then there's all sorts of hyperlinks there, but you'll see Vanessa and Paris's e-portfolio. So you can get a good look at their learning journey. Oh, thank you for posting that again.
Awesome. Well, thank you both, or not all both, sorry. Thank you all three of you for presenting. That was really informative. And as someone who's like fairly new to design work, I'm honestly looking really forward to looking through this and being able to explore it. So thank you. I'll quickly stop the recording, but there's no one using the Zoom link after, so people can feel free to ask questions and stay for a little bit.
Oh, that's great. Thank you so much. Yeah, I'm happy to answer